So I was working on another ACOG video which involves the Unity COG mount, so why not talk about it? This mount is actually pretty awesome from an engineering standpoint. It's very well designed and machined, including not only a hollowed out base for weight savings, a slimline mounting plate and screws so that it doesn't get all caught up on your gear, but also the ability to mount a canted red dot in multiple locations. All you have to do is buy their proprietary red dot mount and plate for a whopping $105, plus the mount itself for an additional $179, bringing the grand total to $285, plus tax and shipping. This mount also sits a bit higher than the traditional ACOG mount made by Colt. Now, I bought this in hopes to passively aim through the ACOG with nods, which, believe it or not, is possible through this TA01 NSN model. This model does not have the fiber optic tube on top, which draws in a bit too much light to use under nods and blows out the reticle. This internal tritium only model is a lot softer to the sensitivity of night vision and actually works. Now, getting the proper eye relief and keeping steady isn't nearly as easy or quick as just running a red dot or holographic. Don't expect this ACOG to work nearly as good as that, because it isn't even close. Just assume the ACOG is a dedicated day optic and that you'll need another optic in conjunction for night use. You basically want to run a top-mounted or canted red dot for night vision, and maybe, just maybe, if you wanted to take a further low-probability shot passively with the ACOG under nods. Yes, it's technically possible, just not recommended since you can't see that far under night vision anyway. Also know that this higher mount puts the ACOG around a 3.2-inch height over bore, and the RMR on top a staggering 4.75-inch height over bore, which carry handle gang may like. This is a good time to mention the cram spacer. This spacer is designed to bring the ACOG back on the rifle so that we're not bending our neck so far forward to deal with the short eye relief of this optic. I bought the 0.7 spacer so that I didn't raise the optic too much, and if I used it on the stock ACOG mount, it hits the rear iron sight, blocking the ability to get the optic back. I had to move it one notch forward to clear the rear iron. This is a Knight's micro iron, which is one of the lowest rear irons available, yet it still made contact with the cram spacer. This problem basically eliminates both the 0.5 and 0.7 cram spacer if you're running a rear iron. Unless you like to live dangerously and run no backup irons, you can however get the 0.9 height cram spacer and you should be good to clear over a rear iron sight. By the time you get to this higher height though, why not just buy the Unity COG mount? Not only does it raise you up a bit like the cram spacer does, but the mount gives you 3 positions to place the optic on the mount. It has mounting holes to run flush right in the middle how I ran it, similar to the stock position. Now undo the screws and mount it to the rear, which clears probably every rear flip-up iron on the market. And if you remove the rear iron like a psycho, you can get this guy back even further, very similar to the cram spacer, for those of you who can't cope with the short eye relief of the 4X ACOG. If you're clinically insane, you can also run the cram spacer to the rear of the Unity mount in the rear position to really show that eye relief who's boss. Now finally the forward position, which makes no sense to me, and logically these holes exist to 180 the mount if you're a left-handed shooter and want to run the canted red dot left side while also running the ACOG to the rear. This is because the clamp plate side does not have mounting holes for the red dot plate adapter. Unless you're on a $40 budget for the cram spacer, the Unity mount is better in my opinion since there's less parts and has the canted mount option. My main concern with this optic mount is, does this higher height above bore affect the trajectory of the round using a BDC that was designed around a lower height above bore? Of course I had to test it myself to know, so I headed to the shooting range. First I'm going to 0 to 100 meters using the correct 100 meter subtension inside the reticle, and then check the impacts out to 500 meters since that's the max distance at my local rifle range. I mounted this on the correct 14.5 inch barrel, also using the correct Lake City M855 green tip. That way we'll know if something is off with the higher mount height above bore, the only variable out of order. To understand what I mean, let's start with a standard ACOG height with its trajectory correctly zeroed at 100 meters. You can see with this higher mount, it raises our optic up a bit more than the factory height mount. If we shot using this higher point of aim, we would impact low here where the lower ACOG was zeroed at 100 meters. To 0 to 100 meters with this higher height, we would have to re-zero our bore axis up here to zero our impact with our 100 meter subtension line in the higher optic. By doing this, we are actually raising the angle of our trajectory up a bit, and it changes the trajectory angle not only up close here, but downrange as well out to 500 meters. Because of minute of angle, the new change in impacts potentially grows worse and worse the further out we shoot, as you can see here. If we use the correct 500 meter subtension like the BDC is designed for, we may end up impacting higher somewhere around here, possibly even going over the target. How much exactly? Well, I'm not really sure, but I want to find out. I could run a ballistic calculator, but nothing is as good as real life considering we all position our faces and body differently, so it's best to do it how I would actually be using it. There is a way around this if our BDC ends up off a bit, but we'll get to that in a second. Now let's get this thing zeroed. That hit exactly where I did last time?
I think it did.
All right, let me try one more just to group it. I'm aiming in center again.
You said those things are an inch with each click?
Half. They switched to half MOA like a bunch of man. So two clicks at 100 is 1 inch, but I just went 1 click at ½ inch. During the zeroing process, my impacts were jumping around a bit, so I checked the first thing that usually causes this, and surprise, surprise, a loose optic. I didn't use Loctite and now wasted this trip. I'm not going to risk jeopardizing this test, so I got to come back again and start all over. Now that we're zeroed and the optic is trustworthy with Loctite, we'll check where it impacts at 200 out to 500 meters. So here I forgot to turn on my GoPro, so my bad. There's 3. Now we can analyze the impacts. At 200, the impacts were about a ½ inch higher. At 300, I only shot 2 rounds, which looked barely a ½ inch high. Probably me, honestly. At the 400, we can outline the group to get the average center point, and the impacts are roughly 1.25 inches high. Out here at 500 is where you really start to notice this change in elevation. The target is 5 yards shy of 500 meters, so I'll just add a hair of error on these 6-inch high impacts. Watching back when I zeroed, I may have been a small bit low still, so we should know these impacts could have been a bit higher. If this is the case, I want to again mention how important truing in the ACOG reticle at 300 or 400 meters is. If we go back to our animation, we can see that zeroing at 100 meters with this higher mount can change our impacts to hit higher than the BDC reticle predicts. This trajectory is the correct one when using the stock mount. If we were to raise our point of aim using the 500 meter subtension, it would hit here where it's supposed to impact. With the higher mount, we were actually hitting somewhere around here as you just watched at 500 meters, about 6 to 7 inches or so high. Our 400 meter impacts were high as well as our 300 meter impacts. This is the part where truing the reticle in comes in handy. By shooting again at 300 meters and then adjusting our impacts to be centered in elevation, we can bring down our high impacts at 400 and 500 meters quite a bit. Yes, the impacts at 100 and 200 meters may be a hair low, but we're talking maybe 1 inch at 100 and maybe a ½ inch at 200 as a simple example. This isn't a big deal since the closer a target is, the bigger it is, so I think you'll be just fine. If your rifle isn't sub-MOA at 100 meters, you won't even notice with your group size if you were any lower than usual. Out at further distance is where this does matter. This small change in elevation at 300 brings down our 400 and 500 quite a bit, increasing our probability of a center impact. This is where we'd impact after truing compared to before here at 400 meters, and at 500 we brought it down as well compared to here prior to truing in the BDC reticle at 300. Knowing this, I went back and trued the reticle in at 300 meters center mass. And now we can see what it does at 400 and 500 meters. The 400 meter didn't seem to be off much in elevation, strangely enough. And the 500 did come down a bit if we averaged the center point of this group. By now it was the end of the day, and not only was the target kinda hazy hiding back in the shade at 500 meters, but the sun was straight in my face the whole time. I probably should use a fixture to do this, but it's just not my style. The concept was still achieved, and the takeaway should be 1. Loctite your optics, and 2. Always true in your BDC at a further distance. In my previous ACOG video, this truing was to calibrate the BDC accuracy out the distance, and in this case it helped mitigate elevation deviation with the higher unity mount. This mount honestly didn't affect the impacts as much as I thought it would. The BDC is still totally usable in the higher configuration if you decide to buy one. The mount is a good option for those with much larger heads to avoid canting your face to get a sight picture, gas mask shooting, barricade shooting to get your face behind the optic at funny angles, and night vision compatibility for aiming passively. If none of these are a concern to you, then the good old-fashioned Colt mount will do you just fine. That's included with the optic. Thanks for watching, and thanks for helping me pass 4,000 subscribers as the channel continues to grow. I've been super busy with work, and during the creation of this video, my amazing Doberman Cato passed away after a great 9 years of rock-solid companionship. I've had Cato since he was born, and let me tell you, these dogs are a dream. If you have a dog, especially a Doberman, go enjoy some good one-on-one time with them because they need your love. They devote their lives to us, and we should devote some time back to them in return.